How applications are read. As I mentioned at the beginning, I've worked at two universities. I worked in undergraduate admissions at Cornell for 4 years and graduate admissions at Princeton for 6 years. They're very different. Undergraduate admissions and graduate admissions, even at the same university, are night and day. Obviously, we're only talking about undergraduate admissions at this point. I know that to all of you, the parents, it's almost like a black box, right? You submit your application, or your child submits an application, and you wonder what happens thereafter. And it does differ from university to university. And even within a larger university, there could be many different ways that applications are read. Either hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of applications are received by these universities. Most universities these days, I should say many slash most, about 1,000 universities use what's called the common application. Just like the name sounds, it's one application, and the information that your student fills out, it's common to any university. So your student's name isn't going to change, the parents' information isn't going to change, the high school counselor isn't going to change, the courses taken and the grades received and the transcript received are not going to change. The main essay is the main essay. So my point is, all of that information is filled in for the common application universities. And if you fill, or if your son or daughter fills all of that in, all of that information gets submitted to the universities that he applies to. Now, some universities have additional information. For example, if you apply to, let's say, the University of Georgia, they're going to want to have you fill out extra information. Are you from the state of Georgia? Are you a resident, full-time resident of this state? How many years have you been a resident? So it's not necessarily hard information, but there's a lot of information that each university, public and private, are trying to find out that is in addition to that common information. University of Georgia has an extra essay that students need to complete. And this year it's based on literature that has actually had an impact on the student. If the student applies to, let's say, a super highly selective university like Stanford, Stanford has 3 longer essays, maybe 300, 400 words each, and then they have 5 50-word essays. So every university that uses the common application has the common information. And then I don't know the number, but a very high percentage of universities ranked in the top 100 or top 200 have additional essays or essay questions or residency questions or that sort of thing. So in any case, the universities collect all of this information into their, let's say, their database, and then they distribute them. They'll distribute them to their admissions officers. Oftentimes, the admissions officers are reading applications based on geography. So if you're from, let's say, the Southeast, I used the University of Georgia as an example. If you're from the Southeast, that means Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, and so forth. If you're from the Midwest, then all of the applicants from that geographic region will be read together. So almost always, universities will divide their applications into geography, and their admissions officers are reading based on geography for a few reasons. One is that if an admissions officer is reading all applications from Ohio, and she's reading those applications year after year after year after year, she gets to know every single high school from the state of Ohio, and she knows what to expect and what not to expect. And she might create relationships with the school counselors from those different high schools so that she can ask them questions or they can ask her questions. It's not to say that there's a quota on the number of students that a university can take from a given high school or a given state or a given region, although admittedly, they do tend to try and admit students in a percentage that matches the application pool. What I mean is, if 50% of the applicants are from the state of California, the university might want to make 50% of their acceptances from the state of California, just so that the acceptances are reflective of where the applicants are coming from. It's not a perfect science. It's really not black and white either. What are admissions officers looking for? We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But the point is, applications are typically separated by geography. They might also be separated by college division. I'll come up with a graphic in a few minutes for this, but what I mean is, if a university has a school of music, a school of business, a school of arts and sciences, a school of engineering, a school of communications, a school of education, and so forth, usually, not always, but usually applications are divided by those schools as well. So if you're from Ohio and you're applying to the School of Engineering at University X, You might not actually be competing from your friend who's from the same Ohio high school, but is applying to the School of Business. You might be, but oftentimes you're not. So, a lot of people think that the universities can only accept a set number of students from a set number of high schools or set number of states and so forth, but it really doesn't work that way. The universities are looking for students who are interesting, memorable, likable, a good academic fit for the institution. Maybe they're looking for more men in the social sciences or liberal arts and sciences colleges. Maybe they're looking for more women in business or engineering. So it's not an exact science, as I mentioned earlier. Well, in any case, the university receives all of these applications. They are typically divided by geography and by school or college division. And admissions committees, it might be a committee of one, and that person is an individual reader who makes yeses and nos and maybe decisions, or it might be a committee of two where they're bouncing ideas off each other. No matter what the process, almost always a second or third person will review each application. If the, let's say, statistics are so far below the university's averages with regard to the SAT score or the ACT or the GPA, it might only go through that first reader. They might not have a second reader or a committee of readers or the higher level deans and assistant deans and so forth of admissions. So you always want your student's application to be a yes or a maybe. Well, of course you want the application to be a yes, but usually in that first round, they're either maybes or nos. There's not a lot of yeses that first time around because for an individual reader to make a yes is a risky venture. Usually that person says, this application is really, really great. I think this is a yes, but let me put it to another colleague or to a set of colleagues, a committee, and so forth. So it's a very iterative process. Usually, let's say I'm reading all of the applications as I used to from the state of Texas who are applying to the College of Arts and Sciences. I would make all of my admissions decisions on yes, nos, and maybes, mostly nos and maybes. And all of those maybes would be read by a second group of people. So all of the applications that are in the maybe pile will be read again and then again and again until a yes or no decision is made. If they cannot make a decision, then oftentimes there's a wait list where the admissions committees are saying, you know what, we think you're a really excellent candidate. We don't have room or space, or we think that there's maybe others who are perhaps slightly more qualified or perhaps more interesting for our university who will make a more obvious, meaningful contribution. But we still want to acknowledge that you as an applicant are quite strong. That's where the wait list comes in.